Okay, and I believe we are live. Hello, everyone, and thank you all very, very much for joining us for today's session, and that is unlocking the strategic power of global payroll data. I'm Gerard Adlum from Payslip, and I'm delighted to be joined by a lady that I'm sure, if you've ever attended Payroll Congress, is well known to you, and that is Mary Holland, CPP and Global Payroll Advisor. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Gerald. Welcome to all of our people around the world. Some of us are in the evening time, some of us are late afternoon, and some of are just starting the day, as I am in California here. Excited to be able to present with Gerald today so that we can talk about unlocking the strategic power of global payroll, a passion I've had for about 15 to 20 years on global payroll and spent some time in finance. So they all kind of align together in the strategic power and the power that you have in your organization.
Absolutely. So we've got a packed agenda. We're hoping to bring it in around 30 to 35 minutes, but also to leave some time at the end for a Q&A. But I'm coming in from Dublin. Mary's dialing in from the US. I'd love to hear in the chat where people are coming in from. I know looking at the sign up list, we've got people from all around the world. But yeah, maybe let us know where you're dialing in from. Be curious to see what kind of a mix we've got around the globe, seeing as this is a global payroll webinar after all. Someone in from Dallas, Texas, not too far from a lot of our clients, actually. Plenty of people based in Texas, so you're very welcome. Virginia in the US, Nicole, hi. New York, okay, a lot of US based people. Maybe that's your attraction, Mary. Maybe people are coming in from you're well known to the US payrollers. And lovely, Justina from Germany, Sarah from Limerick, good old Ireland represented, Eduardo from Madrid, in Spain, of course. Eduardo, we know that we're very cultured people here. We know where Madrid is, don't you worry. Remain Carolina, Detroit, Michigan. Lovely, lovely, amazing to see that spread of people. And there has been huge interest in this topic, Mary. And I think that probably should come as no surprise to you. Um, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges, or why do you think a topic like this has attracted so much attention from people?
I think it's payroll's time, and if you're out in webinars or conferences or reading blogs or out in the community looking at some of the material, it's really what does payroll have? And I always consider us having a gold mine, right? So we have a gold mine of information. It's always been there, but what we do with it now, and as companies have expanded globally, so the journey that we've gone globally, it's more and more important to be able to understand what's happening around the world. And in some cases, as we have people on the call that are from the US and I'm from the US, at some point, most of your operations were kind of centered around the US and the costs were associated with the US. But as they expand, you may find that, most of the costs are outside the US. And what does that do when you look at from a financial view and audit view, what's happening in those organizations? And so we need that data to be able to support audits. So we're always audit ready. And I go back about, I worked for a public traded company, and one of my assignments towards the end of my career when I was working with the auditors is I had to share with the auditors kind of the footprint of what's happening outside the US for our organization, because so much of the expenses were outside the US. And it goes from having operations, employees, all of those things that's happening. So that's why I think it's the power of what we have today and the power of making strategic decisions for our organization that we're seeing a lot of attention, which is extremely exciting for payroll as a profession and as we move into the future.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great starting point. So to look at what we plan on covering today, and I'm appreciative, by the way, I'm running a poll that we're all coming at this from very different starting points, right? And some people have been honest enough, Mary, to share, and I'll publish the poll here, but some people have been honest enough, I suppose, to share that they're at the start of that journey, right? They're just
Mm-hmm.
getting started. Others are maybe a little bit more mature. Some would go so far as to say they have a global payroll data strategy in place. So look, we're cognizant of that. We understand that people are coming at it from different places. So if you're a little further along in the journey, then maybe the second half of the webinar where we're talking about how to use the data to tell stories, that might be of more relevance to you than some of the starting blocks. But like I say, we'll cover it all in due time. So the first thing we're going to talk about is data harmonization. So how do you actually create a unified data layer, which is, I suppose, a foundational step in beginning that data journey and that transformational process. Then stepping up, how do you move from a manual process to inject technology and automation into your data flows? Thirdly, as I mentioned, how do you tell a story with that data? How do you surface strategic insights and that can have a key business impact? And finally, because it's 2025 and you simply can't avoid it, Mary, we're going to talk a
Right.
little bit about AI. And I suppose where we're coming from it is the perspective that there's a sense of frustration or a sense of um, uncertainty around what AI can and cannot deliver in payroll. And we would say from our perspective, actually, it's not a potential problem. It's not as in it's not about what AI can't do or can do. It's actually about data. And if you don't have good data that's structured, that's clean, that the AI can feed off, for want of a better word, it's never going to deliver the strategic impact that you hope it will. So we'll cover that in due time. But to begin, I suppose looking at where people sit, Mary, and you've gone through this process with payroll leaders and payroll teams around the world. Where do you typically think the industry is sitting in terms of its data maturity? As you can see, we've sort of listed it out here. There's manual and fragmented, which might be that step if you're just getting started, all the way up towards a true integration where you actually have data feeding into a central hub, and of course the future state AI. Where do you think the industry sits, Mary?
I think so. So first of all, I think you can have different stages in your organization, and I think it's important for people to understand. If you compare, and not just because I sit in the U.S., but if you compare the U.S. to maybe some countries that you might have over in Africa, you're going to have less data maturity. There may not be the integration. You may have providers that you're doing a lot of the manual work for. So I think it's important to know that you want to have, the highest level and using the integration and the automation that's available so that you can drive results and have you're adding that strategic value because you have that information real time. But in some cases, your organization may have countries that aren't at that level right now, right? So what's the roadmap look like? Often, sometimes in this maturity level, we talked about data, we find that there's an HR system that you've purchased. It could be SuccessFactors, SAP, or Workday, very powerful systems. But then you find a group of countries that are unbelievably, and I've seen it, doing it on Excel, right? So I once did some work for a large company, and they really didn't have an HR system for their international. And that was something, as I was working with them, that we ended up moving towards achieving. And that was their first step to get their data clean, right? So those are things that we need to take a look at. And if you don't, you're doing it manually, right? So you're doing it with the manual Excel and some of those items, but definitely the items that are on the left-hand side is what we're striving to achieve. So that we can have the integration. Once you have the true integration, it helps to reduce the manual work that's done and also the errors that are happening. To me, it also gives the payroll professional more power to be able to have the data at their fingertips and provide real time. But it's important, I think, to evaluate where you're at, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is, if somebody sees this and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm still at manual," and they're going to feel bad, it's like I would guarantee that most organizations not are manual for everything. There's reasons for manual, and what's the reason? So digging back down into the history. Sometimes it's acquisitions that cause those items, and how fast you roll the company that you acquired into your footprint in your organization. What's that model look like? So all of those kind of play a part into where you are today.
Yeah, and as we might cover later on, also you're playing catch up to a certain extent.
Mhm.
The HR system that was implemented, and very often payroll is not involved in that situation, not involved in the setting up. So there's probably a lot of untapped potential living within your HCM across a lot of countries. Maybe not all of them, but there's probably untapped potential. But again, that's something we'll dig into maybe a little later. So Mary, the foundational step, payroll data harmonization. This is where it all begins. So I suppose, can you begin to articulate for people maybe why this is a pivotal step, why it's something that can't be skipped, and I suppose what we mean actually by bringing the data together.
Okay. So first of all, I think that, on the left-hand side, we're talking a little bit about the challenges. So you have many sources, right? So we need to first figure out what we've got, right? Anywhere from time and attendance systems, commission systems, stock and equity systems, our HR systems. Where is all that data coming in, and what's the format it is? So for us to harmonize it, we need to understand the sources and what the source looks like, right? What does the data look like? What is the element that's coming across? How is it named? How can we move towards understanding what that looks like, right? So by harmonizing and mapping it, our goal is to be able to understand what those elements and we are using, from earnings, deductions, the taxes that are being paid out. What are they? And how we can then start to harmonize that data and put some structure around it, so that when we see that report, or we're trying to do integration, we can understand what the naming convention is, and what the standard is. So it often is really doing that deep dive into your data and where the source of information is. So it's one of those things that when we start to harmonize it, it is a journey. I'm going to say it's a journey, but it also takes time. But the rewards are well worth it. They're well worth it, because at the end of the day, you're going to have a better understanding of what you actually have. And as you mentioned, Gerald, is, the HR system has a lot of information, but your organization may not be using it, right? So for whatever reason, payroll may not been included. They never had time to do it, so they rolled it out real quick for HR. It's one of those things, is getting everybody together and understanding what we have, and we can talk about the naming conventions and understanding. Yes, we know we have global names and global pieces, but what are the fields set up? And we're going to talk about, or share with you, how we harmonize that so that you can use English and local language to be successful.
Well, and that brings us on to this idea. And again, I'd be really curious to see in the chat how many of you have embarked on a process like this before. What your familiarity or comfort levels with it is. But it's what we call in Payslip your global payroll data taxonomy. So that standardized layer across all of the countries. So let's actually get into some specific examples, Mary, because this is a process you have gone through both in-house as a payroll leader, but also in an advisory capacity. So I suppose this is one example I've picked out here. Housing allowance as a global name. Now I won't insult Eduardo from Madrid by attempting to give you the Spanish pronunciation of that, Eduardo. Nor will I give the person dialing in from Munich the German. And if we had a Japanese person here, I certainly wouldn't insult them by trying to give the Japanese pronunciation. But I suppose the point is, Mary, it underlines just how difficult it can be for a global payroll leader to get a handle on their data. You were dealing with so many localized languages. So again, can you begin to unpack the value of something like this, and some best practices, I suppose, for building it?
Well, to me, okay, so first of all, we'll mention standardization real quick, because sometimes you get asked the question, is your data standardized? And nobody really wants to answer that question, because they think they should be at 100%. You will never be at 100%. It's okay. But think about, as you start this journey on standardization, what you want to make sure that you try to standardize whatever, as most of what you can. And if it's not standardized, it should be linked to a business requirement in that particular country. So putting that behind in your piece. When we come to this to me is an extremely powerful tool, because first of all, having the English name is always helpful, because I don't speak German or Japanese, so if I had my reports that I received, I'd have to have a little grid to know that this was housing allowance. But this is extremely important to know that it also sets the standard when you want to do global reporting. If I want to report back to the organization how much we're spending on housing allowance, I can get it across the country and across the world, and then bring it into a currency that they're looking for. You may be headquartered in Japan, so you may want it all in yen, right? So just it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be in euros, it could be in USD, whatever you want to have when you're trying to do the global reporting. It also gives me as an organization the ability to highlight or pick the subcategories for things that are important to me. So, for example, if I had a large expat population, if I was offering housing allowances, I might pick the subcategory of and change it from a benefit to an expat expense, right? Because we're providing that out and the company is actually paying that housing allowance out to them as part of their expat packages. And anybody that's worked with that particular group knows they're like 2 or 3 times the annual salary. So it helps to build out the actual cost of the expense. It then gives, the information on the wage code and the expense codes as you look at your information in the system. So you actually have at your fingertips, you're designing what works best for your organization. The global name can be whatever you want to name in your company. Same thing with the subcategory. So if there's something that's really important, you may be handing out a great deal of benefits, but some of your bonuses that you're handing out, you may be handing out patent awards. So you may want to do a subcategory on patent awards. So you're pulling that out when you have
Mhm.
bonuses. So looking at what you need and what you want, it's at your fingertips and it's designed for your organization.
And I think, Mary, one of the takeaways from what you're saying there is it's important to get the stakeholders right when
Hmm.
actually drawing this up. That this actually can't be a solely payroll owned pursuit. That actually the more people you involve from various departments, the richer and more suitable for your organization this is going to be.
That's exactly right, Gerald. And one of the things that I'll say, having many people know that I did spend some time in with Payslip, and then I've retired last year. Is one of the things that I found is when they pulled all the stakeholders together, and that includes the HR and the finance team. When they started to look at that, some couldn't believe what they had. They had such scattered results when you were working with the teams together, and then they decided, okay, we want to make this right. So we're working on it. We're going to spend the time on it. Once we all agreed with what it is, then they also even put some procedures and controls in place that you just don't keep adding. You just don't keep adding elements into your system that don't have some structure to them, because in some cases, what some of the organizations that we were looking at, what happened over the years is you might have a bonus and nobody knew what bonus to use. So it was easier just to add another bonus code. So before you know it, you have 25 bonus codes. And why do we need 25, right? So it comes back to that standardization, harmonization. What is the business reason? If you need 25 for a reason, I'm not going to say don't do it, but you need to do what's best for your organization.
Yeah. And I suppose in terms of what this practically might look like, um, yes, Payslip is a technology company, and we have a lot of AI and onboarding tools that can actually help you with some of this data mapping and this data standardization and categorization process. But it is possible to do this yourself, and both Mary and I would encourage you, if you haven't already, it is a simple thing of rely on good old fashioned Microsoft Excel, rope in some of those local experts, begin building it out. The next level up is, that sort of semi-automation stage that we talked about at the beginning, where you're injecting power queries for maybe some of the more power users of Excel. Not everyone has those capabilities, but to a certain extent, you can semi-automate some of this stuff. It might start to look a little something like this. Mary, you've seen, various iterations of sheets like this. You mentioned before there are the rare vendor who can sort of supply you with this kind of a taxonomy guide, but that's not very common. Usually, you're going to have to build this for yourself in house.
Yeah, so you may have a vendor that has you're able to get a report for your element listings. You may or may not, but in a lot of cases, especially when we're looking with local language, you may have already started to build something out in Excel, right? So as we mentioned, what do you have in that? That's the beginning starting point. What can you get from the vendor? What do you have today? And those are the starting points as the stakeholders get together and take a look at, this is what we have in this country and this is what we have in another country. And really, sometimes one of the organizations I worked with, they went even further. We're looking at their general ledger codes and found, you know, why are they booking the allowances? We had five allowances that were booked to one account and the five to another. And so it really helped to standardize that processes on the allowances. And that's why the stakeholder engagement between the finance team and the HR team and payroll. So we all understand that. And as we talked about it, we need to share and communicate what our mission and goal is, right? So once we start asking, what are you using in that particular country, everybody's going to have that fear factor. Are you taking my job away, or what's happening? We have the AI out there, right? So they
Right.
might be thinking AI is going to take over this. We need to communicate the goals that we're trying to achieve by gathering this information.
Exactly. Exactly. I've just launched another poll there, just I suppose around this topic at this first stage of the data gathering and consolidation as to what people would perceive as their biggest challenge. I won't let it run for too much longer, so if people want to submit their answer. But Mary, actually, the biggest thing that's come up across all of it, and I'll share it here now, is that lack of standardization across vendors and countries. So look, I suppose it's no surprise that that is why we
Mhm.
started, because actually, funnily enough, this is the most foundational problem. It's actually our vendors aren't standardized. We internally don't have a standardized process for how we think of our data. So, you can't really go anywhere until you solve that challenge first, really. Um,
Right,
but
and
I,
it goes
go
back
ahead.
to one of the last response was one of them. Yeah, we have some controls over that, but it's messy, right? So that's what you have is a messy situation, and when it's messy, it's frustrating, is number one. But it's not if somebody is out sick or you have some issues in being behind. It doesn't help to have some backup or support from another region to be able to step in and to help if you don't have that standardization there too. So it's really kind of the business continuity and the pieces of that continue.
And I suppose what will bring us on to our next point is, where you inject that technology layer actually is more often than not the way to solve some of these other challenges that people have
Mhm.
listed. Inconsistent or inaccessible data. So again, it's locked behind systems that you don't have integration set up with, or indeed, as we've also seen, Mary, it's locked behind the vendor. So you're always having to go through your vendor to get the data. We all know that's a concern. Or it's because it's locked behind manual processes, spreadsheets, or indeed limited integrations with your HR and finance systems. And that more often than not is a challenge that actually can be solved relatively quickly with technology, that integration question. So we'll fly through this, but I suppose the key areas where you're looking to transition in terms of your data strategy around data entry. So again, moving from manual, inaccessible processes towards automated imports of data from your HR, your HCM system, your time and attendance, benefits, stock options, whatever it is, Mary, the myriad data sources that are out there that a payroll person needs to contend with. So validation, typically it's going to be surfaced after the pay run. If there's a problem, right, it's only after the pay slips have gone out and suddenly you realize actually there's a mistake. We couldn't quite catch it. Ideally with tech, it's surfacing those mistakes or data inaccuracies. Sometimes, Mary, it can just be a misplaced decimal point can cause all the trouble. And it's been able to pinpoint without going through 2,000 lines on a spreadsheet. Again, reconciliation, the same thing. Reporting, the ability to have sort of dynamic, real-time access to the reports. Again, you're not going to your vendor with cap in hand going, can you give me a shakedown on last May or whenever it was, that actually it's there and you can self-serve. And lastly, Mary, I know this is one close to your heart, which is allowing employees to self serve themselves rather than always going to HR or to God forbid, the payroll person to ask them questions about their payslip. Where is it? Being the number one question, Mary, probably.
Where is it, and where's the link or my password? I mean, I think this one is we talk a lot from the recruitment standpoint and the importance of the employee experience, right? So this one to me is so huge because, the HR systems have the ability to bring the payslip in. I'll use Workday as an example. They can bring that payslip in from China directly back into the system. So if I'm a Chinese employee, I'm going to see my Chinese payslip exactly as I would if I received it via the mail or however I was receiving it in the past. But
Yeah.
the advantage to that is huge because, the person, we know we live in a world of 24 hours and everybody works differently. They can look at that pay slip whenever they want, right? Or even pay statements is another piece of that employee experience. So no questions for limits the questions for HR and payroll, but you have a unified experience for employees. So if I'm sitting in orientation for my new hires, I'm going to let them know this is the experience that's happening and how it works. So it's a win-win for the HR teams. It's a win for the employee and payroll. So it's all three groups are really winning that experience, and they have their information at their fingertips.
Yeah. So I suppose bearing in mind that a lot of people on this call may be currently looking to scale up their payroll operations. They may be looking to unlock some of the data that's trapped within the HCM or within other platforms. So we'll send this out to all attendees, so I won't go through it line by line, but I suppose what we've put together here is a little checklist. So when you're evaluating technology from the perspective of global data, here are some of the things that you really ought to be asking and kicking the tires on. Um, some may or may not offer it, others may be stronger in one area than another, but it's important that you understand what their actual capabilities are across all of these key criteria. Suffice to say, some of the most important things you'll want to watch out for are, can they actually accept inputs from multiple formats and systems? So they may have an integration, but it's only with one particular HCM and it's not yours, or they may not have a process for integrating with your time and attendance. So I suppose it's Mary, it's understanding the scope of a project, and I suppose what's still going to be left up to a manual process.
Mm-hmm.
There may be countries, for example, where you only have a handful of employees, so you may be sort of going into it knowing, well, country X, we know there's always going to be a certain amount of manual work. It's simply not worth the investment to implement technology there. That's one consideration.
Definitely that's one consideration. The other thing I think you find is in some regions, they're so limited in the partners that you have available. So it does go back to a very manual process. We talked about manual process, but it comes back to the country's technology kind of experience where they are today. Now, will they change in 5 and 10 years? My guess is yes, because we've had such growth in this. But if you are in those countries, then it's something that you need to be aware of what that looks like and what the impact is. And then once again, I think it's important to look at your providers, especially when you have the larger providers. What capabilities do they have in all of these areas? And how do they compare to who you're using today, right? So it doesn't hurt to do what I would say kind of an evaluation or roadmap. What's out there and what am I missing? And we're going to talk about AI as we get to the end of this session, but that is one of the things too that's being used. So making sure that you take a look at what's available. And then of course, I'm going to be very honest. Sometimes we're with a vendor for kind of logistic reasons at the highest level, senior level, that say this is the vendor we want to use.
Yeah.
Is there happens to be a better vendor for them? In some cases, I've seen yes, but we have to make it work, and we move forward with that. So making sure that you're extending what's actually happening, roadmaps, and what do you need, right? It's like, what do you need for your data and what do you need to move the needle in your organization to be successful? So you have to think and ask those questions. Be challenging. And here we go to to
Well,
our next challenge for to help you.
well, this is it. Well, look, with that in mind, and yes, look, this particular diagram, I suppose, is payslip centric. But I suppose what we would try and put across to you is now is the time in terms of the technology that's in the market that you can, for the first time maybe ever as a payroll person, take control actually end to end of your data once you've got a centralized hub and repository. And that thing that I mentioned earlier on of can it accept multiple inputs? Well, again, is it able to ingest data from a HCM or a HRIS, additional sources? What kind of visibility is it giving me into my vendors process? All of those things are hugely important. And that, I suppose, is the next level up, the automation or the scale up, Mary, for how you're handling your data.
Correct. And I think if you that once you get the data, then how are we going to, if we look on the left-hand side, where we've harmonized and standardized, how are we going to build that, the integration? What systems do we have available, evaluating what that looks like? You already mentioned, Gerald, that we may have to do some work with our HR systems because payroll wasn't included in the roadmap model, or I've also seen in some cases they didn't worry about international, they just focused on the US, right? So I've seen many things as I've helped organizations or talked with organizations. Nothing wrong with that. We have to just move forward so that we now have the ability, and we're talking really about what Payslip offers to the people outside, what you can, as a client, what you can achieve and build out for your future, so that you have what I consider a complete roadmap with HR and payroll. And then you have the visibility to know what's happening, but you also have the huge visibility to pick that provider that you want to work with. Now that is one of the things that if you're looking at distinguishing differences, one of the things is not having to rip out and go with the vendors providers, because unfortunately, as we look around the world, there is some very complex countries that we need to pick a provider that's going to make sure that we're compliant and we're following all the rules and regulations. Because if we don't, the last thing we could see is we could be shut down for non-compliance and be in the media. So that piece is the management and visibility is huge as we look over to the right side. But as we look kind of what they're going to deliver once we get the information from the information they're receiving through the Payroll engine in the middle, right? All of the reporting that we have, the AI, the checking of the data, all of that validation that's happening inside the platform, we're sending good information or good data over to the provider to do the calculation. So we don't sometimes have 2 or 3 back and forth on things for missing items, right? A new hire needs 5 items, and we can use AI to identify that we're missing the birth date, for example, for that particular employee. So using that information to kind of integrate it in, and then getting, as we looked at the processing coming back, as you're getting the reporting globally, at an employee level versus a country level or at a global level. To me, that's essential in today's world, because our finance teams need that to be able to project, what the total cost is in a country or a location. Sometimes countries will introduce large tax increases, and by having that information, you can then have that reporting on that very first payroll. You know exactly what the impact is to your organization, and then providing that information to your stakeholders that need that information. So it goes from the people in the GL, where you have a consolidated, standardized GL, so they're not chasing moving accounts and reconciliations, or even coming over to payroll and saying, how come that was booked in XYZ versus that? So you have that standardization of what's happening. You have visibility to the banking of what's actually happening with the bank files, what the exchange of that data is, a checklist of making sure all of your items are done. So really, it builds an ecosystem that keeps you audit ready, right? So you know where your data is, you know the flow of your data, And so if an auditor comes in, you're able to show them exactly what happens, right? So having worked in finance for many years and worked with auditors, I'm always looking from the viewer vision of audit ready. And so what items can we make sure that we're audit ready and we have the visibility to just prove to that particular auditor that here's our process and our steps. And then for me is the sooner you get them out of your area, the happier you are, and you move on to doing other strategic things. So
Absolutely.
it's an
That's something, Mary, that
extremely
you can say amongst friends here on this webinar. You can admit that that's your mindset.
that's my mindset. I always was like, let's be audit ready and let's have the information there so that they're gone in a few hours instead of
Yeah.
having instead of staying days with me. Not that I don't like to exchange and be around people. It's just that we want to make sure that we're ready and it makes our life easier. So really having this as an ecosystem, we're really have the benefits of everything that's going to be there for us, the technology that we're going to have in the integration in the future. We're also building the footprint of, and a lot of talk about AI, but it then sets the stage for the next pieces that AI is going to play, and we do need to accept it. And not scary, it's just a tool. And I always kind of reference it to the tool when the cell phone first came out and people said you were going to be able to do this on a cell phone, and there was disbelief. But heaven knows we're doing everything on the cell phone today. So who knows what the future is, but
Well,
it's exciting times.
that's it. And I suppose that brings us nicely onto the next part, which is, okay, let's assume all things going well. You've been able to harmonize your data, you've centralized it, you've implemented automation and integrations. The next logical question, Mary, that we're often asked is, I got all this data. Now, what exactly do you think I can do with it? And so I'm running a poll at the minute. Just I'm asking people how they're currently using payroll data. A lot of people saying, actually, the overwhelming response is that it's really just for reporting and for that audit trail. That actually is seems to be largely the extent of how people are putting payroll data to use. So, Mary, you and I, we've put together some real world examples that we've each seen from, across both Payslips customer base, but also some of the companies that you work with in terms of how they're using payroll data to surface insights, to the wider team. So I suppose the first one, Mary, is workforce cost intelligence. And as I've said here, basically understanding where your payroll spend is going and why. And I suppose more often than not, Mary, this is one of the most interesting, I suppose, data points or packages of data that your finance analysts, for example, are going to want to know, or is very interesting to them if you can present it.
Well, I think it's extremely interesting because if you look at the overtime, just the overtime cost in country to country, and there's different rules, right? So what does that look like in that particular location? And so why are the costs spiraling? A lot of times it's overtime or increase in headcount, right? So that information hasn't been communicated across the board. But those are things that the financial analyst teams, they love that information. They want to know what the cost is. They love all of this stuff that we're able to provide to them. As we said, we had the gold mine. And the reason for that is because they're trying to forecast what the expenses are. So when they have their monthly meeting for the results for that month, they have to answer to what they budgeted for and to what the actuals are, right? So then if they're unaware that they have large overtime in some locations. If you can communicate that there is a project that somebody's working on, we're going to have large overtime to the financial analyst team, then they're able to at least be aware of it and see what they can do. And is it just this month or is it in the future, right? So making sure that you have that. One of the items that I used to work with when I worked at public traded company was we had a lot of stock equity. And so what I worked with the financial analysts is help them understand what around the world, what the taxes were going to be, what the employer tax impact was going to be. In some countries there were caps, if you use the US example, a cap on the Social Security and the Medicare. And when would those caps happen based on the projection of what the stock was and what it looks like, and how much that even helping the Treasury Department understand if we're having this stock grant that's going to go off, what's the impact of cash they have to have ready to make the payments to the location. So understanding that piece. The other piece is really, when you start to look at the world of where we're going to put people, the cost of locations, really what is the true cost in that particular location to hire and keep people in that footprint, and what does that mean to your organization, and what's the impact, and those type of costs start to come out because there's benefits, there's taxes that we might not be aware of in some countries. Years ago, when we started kind of the journey to globalize, we were just outshoring the work, right, to lower cost locations. And soon organizations found out that they weren't lower costs because there was a lot of employment costs that were associated with it, with taxes and benefits that had to be paid that they didn't expect, right? So those are the things that, as we look at it, where's the right place to put that person and the teams that we're trying to expand to lower cost locations. And of course, we always want to decide what's the best place. So it helps us to decide and plan for the future, right? So leadership knows what the cost is, and they have to, at the end of the day, the CEO and the CFO have to be able to provide the results, and they at least need to have some insight to what that's going to look like. And payroll has the information. We just need to continue to work with the teams and be the center of excellence, I think, for that information, and work with your stakeholders. Ask them what they need. And once you start if you haven't done that in the past, once you start asking them, you then become friends for life with that kind of group. Because they have no idea. Like they're shocked when you say this or that or this many, even when we look at a simple thing like the number of days off you have in a certain location, or as we all know across the world, the accruals, if we're accruing for, all of the leave pieces, when we release the leave accruals, if we're not being taken, it's different times in the year based on the country's requirements. So what does that look like for those teams? Because of course, if they're going to get a bonus and get a release of a credit, then they need to explain that credit too. So it's really just us all working together to understand the information. But technology and reporting and all of those items give us the ability to support the organization.
Absolutely. And look, we're coming towards the end of our session here. So again, we'll circulate these slides with people, and they can digest them in their own time. But again, some thoughts here around how you can use it to bolster your retention and reward strategy and become BFFs with your HR team. Mary's already be BFFs with your finance team. So who said you didn't get into payroll to make friends? And then, as Mary said, the market entry and the expansion planning. So again, identifying where is a good entity to continue our expansion, looking at our cost center, being able to compare, I suppose, one to the other. And actually, Mary, to really tie a bow on it, that goes back to the importance of that standardization and categorization.
Mm-hmm.
That is the fundamental thing that's going to allow you to truly compare our cost centers in France, Singapore, Germany. It's actually only when you compare, I suppose, element by element that you can really paint a true picture.
Right. When you and a lot of organizations like to understand at some point, what are they really spending on bonuses, right? And they have no idea. And you talked about standardization. This gives us real-time ability to do the reporting. And we have like I'm going to say, we have the information instantaneously, so that we're not consolidating it through Excel files for a week and then provide the information. That doesn't seem very real time to me, but it does exist. I know it's been done. I've heard it being done. I feel sorry for the people that are doing it.
I won't name the individual, but of course, there's a story from one of our customers before they used Payslip, that they were asked once by the new CFO to compile a thorough report on compensation and in particular commission data over the past 12 months. And it took the payroll team approximately 2 weeks to put it all together because the data was scattered here, there, and everywhere. And look, that's not scalable. But I suppose that's the limitations of a manual spreadsheet based approach to your data, really. And then lastly, Mary, we'll wrap it up. I suppose we have just a couple of slides here around AI, and that is, I suppose, what we've called the AI reality check, because I think there's some frustration or uncertainty or hesitancy around what AI can do for you. And the reality is that all comes back to how good and how accessible and available your data is. Without good data, as we say here, it's just noise. In actual fact, it can be counterproductive. All it means is that the mistakes you made are going to be compounded, and that's what scales, and that the insights you circulate, they may actually not be reliable. So it all comes back to that clean data set.
Mhm.
But once you've got that in place, again, AI, the use cases, Mary, it makes for very exciting reading, I think, as a payroll person, the potentiality of AI when we get this right.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's giving a lot of power. It's giving power to use the data that we have in the organization, but we're also building, I would say, a center of excellence to provide that information to make a difference for the organizations that we're working for. But as you mentioned, we're only as good as the data. And I think there's been numerous sessions that I've listened to and read articles, and we all talk about what AI can do and this and that. But the underlying person or the team that's doing the presentation will come back to, if you don't have your data correct, you're going to get garbage. So it comes back to AI. AI is not going to be able to tell you you have garbage data, right? Your data is not clean. You're going to have to be able to get that correct to start that journey. And the other thing, as we looked at, it has a lot of potential. I know as you mentioned already, there's a lot of talk about it. I think it's important for you as leaders and team members to understand, talk about it, take away that fear factor, look at what it can do. Also, it's being used behind the scenes in some of the payroll services today to check the data, right? So looking at what it can and cannot do. And if we look at, a simple thing of AI having the ability to pull out who has the same bank account. Now, it could be a husband and wife working for the same company, but is there no connection to the two of them and somebody's changed that bank account to that? So what does that look like, And how fast can you pull some of those reports on some of those changes, especially when we look at fraud items that are going on? You're going to get instantaneous information. Yes, you can pull a change report and go through that change report, but in some pieces, we need that information instantaneous to see what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think like, from our perspective as a technology company, we're being very deliberate and cautious in how we implement
Mhm.
AI, because this is where payroll as a profession and as an industry is different to other industries that are racing ahead with AI, because the data that they're handling and that they're touching is far less sensitive and personal. When you are dealing with people's personal information, their pay data, you have to be very careful in how you treat it. And you have to be very careful in how you translate it, how you transform it, how you use it to generate insights. There are far more guardrails, I think, rightly in place in payroll than there are in other industries. So I think that's one example of why perhaps the speed of adoption is being a little slower. But I think it's a good thing. But for example, I mean, to your point there, one of the ways in which we are trying to surface anomalies. So again, if there's something is flagged in the variance we've compared last month to this month, what we expected to see, the flagging of anomalies, right? That's a perfect instance of where technology can save you hours and hours of work rather than going through line by line to find the difference. I guess parking our old friend VLOOKUP and moving with the time. But 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 those are some practical, real world implications of better technology. It all comes down to saving you time, making your life easier so you can focus on other things.
And then, of course, it's one of those areas, as you mentioned, we have the most sensitive data, and we also have data security rules and privacy rules around the world that are different. There's not one size fits all. So it's one of those, for everybody on the call, it's kind of stay tuned to see what happens in some of those rules and regulations that come out, if there are changes on that. So it's really important to be able to understand that and work closely with the teams that are in charge of that governance around the data privacy pieces. So that piece is, to me, is something that we need to watch. And it's kind of stay tuned. I would say stay tuned to see. I don't think it's going to, that's one of the things that you hear right now is there's a lot of concerns about that. But it is in every industry, and it is one of the hottest industries, I think, for everybody out there to see what we can do with it. So it's, exciting times as we move forward.
Absolutely. Well, look, we'll open the floor to any questions. I know we're pushed up against the time that we'd allotted, so if people need to hop off, that's understandable, but I'll allow some time for any questions that anyone might have. But I suppose a snapshot of some of the takeaways, harmonization being the first step, actually consolidating your data, putting that global layer and that global approach to your data on top of it, ultimately, requiring technology to scale what you're trying to achieve, the importance of kicking the tires on the integration part of the technology purchase. Does it play nicely with the other systems within our tech stack? Because if it doesn't, it's going to create more friction and you want to reduce it. And lastly, AI, yes, it can be an unlock, but only if the data is right. So look, I will leave it there. Mary, as ever, thank you so much for joining us. I'd say to people, if you're interested in learning more about Payslip, please get in contact with us directly. Mary, any final words to send people off into the night or into the morning with?
No, I know you're going to give them the deck that had great information for them to look at and think about. And we kind of do that data, look at that data so that you can be successful, because and don't feel bad if it's messy. You're not the first person. I would say that the first poll that we had, I've seen those answers every single time I do a presentation. Those are kind of the standard answers you have, and some people feel bad, but don't feel bad. It's the journey that you're going to take, and sometimes you're just new into the role. You've been put into the role, and now that is your job to transform it. And that's just another pointer. If you're new to your organization, make sure that you kind of do your review yourself too, because you're only as good as the person that was before you, right? So I hate to say that. I'm not going to say, I'm just going to say, however it was set up and what data they had at that point, they made decisions, but you may have different input. So making sure you also do kind of a review of what you have. And then, of course, your stakeholders, as we talked a lot, they need to be your friends for life. And we all need to understand exactly what each person is trying to achieve, and we can work together for results.
And if I can leave you with one takeaway from experience, there is no organization too complex that you can't get a handle on the data.
Right.
Every organization across every industry, with all types of pay groups, with 10, 15, 20, 30 different entities, all of them ultimately started on this journey from exactly the same position that you were in now, and it absolutely can be done. So yeah, we'll leave you with that. Thank you very much. Like I say, .com if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. But otherwise, I will say thank you very much for joining us, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.